All right, Dr. Ron, good evening. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Sam.
So let me just ask, where are we at right now?
In our preaching and teaching on Sunday mornings, kind of what's going on with it.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in a series on the end of John, really, and we talked about on Easter Sunday, we talked about resurrection. We kind of led up to that, and what resurrection living means. How does the resurrection of Christ affect me? And when you read through John and see that he is really presenting Christ as believable, he's presenting him as Messiah. In chapter 1 he does this, and then he centers around 7 miracles basically between chapter 2 and 12. And then the last part of that book just kind of picks up on the last week. And through chapter 20 can be, some people look at it and say, well, from the last 2 verses, it almost looks like a conclusive statement. He kind of sums it up in verses 30 and 31 of everything that he's been talking about. But then comes chapter 21, kind of as a prologue, in the sense that he picks up with Jesus showing himself to these guys who have gone to the seashore to go fishing. And he knows they're there. This is post-resurrection, but these guys are still kind of in the twilight zone because, they probably none of them feel like they have acted honorably during the time of his crucifixion. And then for the resurrection, they seemed so surprised. I mean, they had to even be surprised at their disbelief in all of this. Jesus knows all this. He's appeared to them a couple of times. John says then that he has come to them again on the seashore. They fish all night, and he's asking them about what they've caught. Of course, they've caught nothing. He tells them where to throw the net. They do. It says in verse 11 they caught 153 and they're dragging them in. John says, hey, that's Jesus. Peter impulsively jumps in the water. Now, Peter has really here kind of been a leader for these guys, for these disciples. So Jesus calls them in, but for Peter, he's had probably the worst days of his life in the last week. He has denied Christ and denied him. First he said, Lord, I would die for you. And he kind of shows that when he pulls his sword there at Gethsemane to defend Christ when Judas betrays him, and they come and he cuts Malchus' ear off and part of it, and Jesus gets him to put his sword back and kind of stays him. But after that, he denies him the 3 times, and then the Gospels say that he wept bitterly. So he really felt like he let the Lord down. So we look at this, really none of these guys probably feeling like they really did well during this time. So how can I overcome this? How can I overcome failing the Lord? How can I live in redemption here and restoration? I think everybody's interested in that. I want to know, how can I get past mistakes? How can I keep my mistakes from turning into misery that lasts a long time? We want misery in our life to have a very short shelf life. How can that happen? And this is what Christ is going to do for them. So after they'd eaten breakfast, it says here in verse 15, Jesus asked him, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? More than who? A couple of things here. First off, he says, Simon, son of Jonah. He's calling him by the name that Peter had formerly gone by, for one thing. But Peter has decided he's going to go fishing. So when all is lost, when Camelot is lost, what do? You go back to what you know to do, and that's what he did. And in that life, that's who he was, and Jesus called him by that name. And now he is getting very personal with him, and he asked him, do you love me more than these? And you say, well, who are these? Are you talking about the fish that he, that he's caught, or is he talking about the guys? And probably he's talking about the guys here, and my assessment of that. But he asked him. He said, "Feed my lambs." Then twice he said, "Feed my sheep." And in the language for lambs, the first time he mentions that, it is it's like a little lamb. And then the other two times he talks about more of a mature sheep. But he asked him, out of those times, he asked him, "Do you love me?" And the word that he used when he asked Peter the first two times, "Do you love me?" Peter said, "I love you." The first two times he asked him that, he used the term for love that was the highest word in the language. But Peter answered him with a different word for love. And then the third time Jesus asked him, he used another word, which is the word that Peter had used the first two times, and Peter then answered him a third time in a row and said, "I love you." And that's the word. It was a little different from, the first term, but I think that's a picture of Jesus meeting Peter. Even though Peter felt like he had let him down, Jesus met him right there and restored him. And I think there's something there for everybody, because we all feel like we fail him, and we all feel like we fail sometimes, and the Lord doesn't want you to live there. He doesn't want you to stay there. So that's really what this series has been about, and that is resurrection living, and that is how to come back from death, come back from the things that there's so many vortexes out there that try to bring you down, and that's what this is overcoming that.
Can I make some comments?
Absolutely.
So earlier in John's gospel, Jesus meets Peter as a fisherman. And is this where he goes, "Come with me, you'll become fishers of men," and so on and so forth, right?
So as Jesus is calling Peter this fisherman, I think of course Jesus called a range of people, not just fishermen. But I think there's a personal connection there, that he's calling a regular, believable guy. And I think the connection from that question to this passage is that this has been an ordinary guy who has risen to extraordinary things. Sam, for 3 years of public ministry, everything that Peter and those men have needed, it was provided for them by Jesus. Everything. They've not had any needs, any food they needed, any resource they needed, anything they needed, they had it. Jesus, either he would send them for it, or he could manufacture whatever they needed. It was there. And now, for the first time in 3 years, the setting is, man, they feel like they're kind of in the poorhouse,
right?
And he's there. He's going to meet them there where they are, to get them from where they are to where they need to be.
So I think this is, if I tie this theme together in my mind, I'm thinking what an amazing example of what needs to happen when we feel like we failed and backslidden, and we feel like no matter how far we go, we just end up back at the start. So Peter's back at the start. He's backslidden all the way from great things down here, and now Jesus has said, it's not over for you. Pick up, start again, and go well beyond. And I think that's highly encouraging to know that even when we fail at that one point, even when we backslide, even when we, just fail to meet the mark, Jesus is still going to be there at the end of the day saying, pick up the broken pieces and let's move forward together.
Absolutely.
I think that's awesome. I think that's amazing.
Together being all of them. It hasn't been a good day. It hasn't been a good 3 days for any of those guys. Right. I mean, they've all looked back on that with regret. We talked earlier about Judas. We talked about Iscariot, and the fact that he had betrayed the Lord, and what would have happened had he, if he would have come that day. I mean, that introduces a whole new idea. But But he didn't. He could not live with his regret. Peter had a hard time managing his, but when John pointed out that was Jesus on the shore, impulsively, Peter jumped right in the water and went. And that's, when you get to the place to where you really need forgiveness, you need restoration, where you are is not a good place that you want to be, man, it's time to jump in. And that's exactly what he did. And really, Sam, that's really where I am right now with the series and where we're going. This will, eventually next week we'll get into the first part of Acts and and what happens moving forward, from here. And we kind of, we talked about this, in the sense of, breakfast and beyond, because they had breakfast with Jesus. Now, what's beyond that? What happens next? So, all of these guys had gone from this incredible moment of disbelief to all of them being martyred for him. Yeah. The very fact that this event changed their lives that much, it can do the same for you and me today. I mean, when people embrace this and realize that if I will trust Christ with my life, there is a higher calling, and when I say there's got to be something more, there is something more. And that's what John's gospel is about.
So I think we've got to wrap up here, but something I thought about today while thinking about all this was at the Last Supper, Jesus says, the adversary wishes to sift you like wheat. And ultimately, it seems like they got sifted pretty hard, but they all came through in the end. Say so. Because I think the measure is the people themselves are not what's being sifted. It's the sin, and the sin they're clinging onto. Right?
There's a lot of sifting going on today.
There's a lot of sifting. Hey,
I
do understand.
You need to decide what you believe and dig in, man.
Well, I think that's it.
Okay, Sal.